I recently had an interesting challenge, a conversation with a guy who brought up what he called the deadly trilemma. It was 3 verses from the Bible that supposedly disproves God or the Bible, depending on which way you take it. In 1 Corinthians 13:4, it says that love is not jealous. In 1 John 4:8, I believe, it says that God is love. And then in Exodus 20, in verse 5, it says that God is jealous. And so there you would see a problem that if God is love and love cannot be jealous, then God cannot be jealous. But Exodus says that he is. And so you'd have a logical problem. But you would only have this problem if jealousy in Corinthians is the same jealousy as Exodus. Only if those two match. In logic, it's the law of identity. Something has to be identical. If there's a difference and it's not the same thing, and it will logically fall apart. It just doesn't stand. And so we need to look to see, is the jealousy of God in Exodus the same jealousy that Paul is referring to in Corinthians? And I don't believe it is. In Corinthians, many translations say love is not jealous, but others say love is not envious. The idea of jealousy in 1 Corinthians 13, Paul is saying that love does not envy other people. It does not desire what others have. It's that sense of jealousy where you want what is someone else's. But that's not the jealousy that is in view in Exodus 20. Because God isn't envying what someone else has. He's not wanting what belongs to someone else. God is jealous of the worship and obedience of his people because it is rightfully his. He's not envious. He is zealous about guarding what is his. So this is the idea of, say, a married man, or just a man in general, wanting the wife of someone else. He's jealous of what another man has. Versus someone whose wife is, say, flirting with other men. Now he's jealous for his wife. He's not jealous of the other men. He's jealous for his wife. It's a determined protection, guarding what is yours. And so we see that in Exodus and 1 Corinthians, jealous does not mean the same thing. So therefore there is no contradiction in the Bible, in these verses. It doesn't set up a logical problem. The other part of this challenge, the guy I was talking to said, okay, fine. So even if the jealousies aren't the same, the jealousy that is in Exodus 20, verse 5, is not a good jealousy because it says that God will punish the children and grandchildren to the 3rd and 4th generation for the sins of the father. But is that really what it's saying? See, because you have to remember that the law, these commands are being given to a nation. God's commanding the Israelites as a group of people, not just as specific little do's and don'ts for individuals. The individuals have to obey because they're part of the nation, but the agreement is with the entire nation. It's a covenant between God and the nation of Israel. And that if you as a people turn away from me, it will affect the generations that follow. We see this in play not just a year later. Okay, so the comment is made at Sinai. About a year later, they're supposed to go take the promised land, and they refuse because they're scared. They don't trust God to accomplish what he promises. And so he says that they will wander the wilderness for 40 years until that current generation dies out, and it will be their children who take on the promised land. Well, it wasn't only that generation wandering in the wilderness. Because of their sin, the entire nation had to suffer through the wilderness. And so you have the children and the grandchildren. You have at least 2 generations that are born and come up during this time. And so the sins of the fathers refusing to take the land are visited upon their children and grandchildren because they have to endure the consequences. It was not a punishment on the generations that followed, but the generations that followed were affected. It'd be the same thing as if I were to do something wrong and I get fired. My boss is not punishing my children, but my children endure the effects of my wrongdoing. And so that's what we see at work here in the scripture. So again, no problem. God is loving, He is just, He is forgiving, He is gracious, long-suffering, slow to anger. But when His anger does come, it accomplishes what it means to. But what we see in this challenge, the supposed deadly trilemma, is that it's not so deadly after all. The Bible stands the scrutiny, and so does the character